We're looking at the biblical judges, a group of people who performed heroic feats during a period of history known as the Bronze Age collapse, and seeing what lessons we can draw for the final age of world collapse, the Great Tribulation. Let's back up for a minute and talk about a couple of guys that I've passed over in the last 3 videos. One of the first judges is a fellow named Shamgar. We only get one sentence on him, but it does hint at a backstory. Shamgar is a Hebrew name, but his father's name is Canaanite, meaning he probably had mixed parentage. The name Shamgar means sword, and since names had significance back then, we're being told he probably had a violent upbringing. What kind of hero is Shamgar? The kind that can win a fight with a piece of farm equipment, a spear hook contraption called an ox goad. His 600 victims may have taken place over time. He may have been a sort of guerrilla fighter. But he got the job done, and the message seems to be it's less about the equipment, more about you and your level of resolve. I'm not saying don't make any preparations for what's coming. I'm just saying don't neglect the most important part of your survival strategy. You. Which brings us to a guy named Ehud. If Othniel, our first judge, is Captain America, the throwback to the greatest generation embodiment of all the country could be guy, well, Ehud is Deadpool. Remember that time God used an assassin to save his people? Ehud remembers. And I don't know what sort of sense of humor Ehud had, but the text has more than just a little fun with his judgment. Ehud's opponent was a guy named Eglon. Now, Eglon the Moabite is presented as a sort of mafia boss making routine trips into Israel to shake down the Israelites. But don't get stuck on the mental image of Don Corleone. From here on out, he's Jabba the Hutt. You see, very few people even had the opportunity to let themselves become morbidly obese in the ancient world. There wasn't that many calories readily available, and you did a lot of walking back then. So it's not something people were used to seeing. It's the kind of thing we find graffitied on ancient walls. It looked strange and funny to them. Now, speaking of strange, Ehud had kind of a strange superpower. Remember that the Hebrew word for judges implied heroic power, and this all ties back to our Mosaic Law promise. Live out this code, and you'll be as strong, as effective, as influential as 100 normal men. You'll perform superhuman feats. That sort of thing is easy to see with somebody like Samson, who brings down a building with his bare hands. A little harder to make out when it's a guy who has to use special scissors. Unless you're talking about an ancient society where the men typically wore a kind of sash-like belt and had their daggers sticking through them. Most people being right-handed, the typical greeting would have involved clasping the right hands, as a sign that you meant no harm since your sword arm was occupied. Unless you're left-handed. Ehud makes his own blade. The normal weapon in ancient world was too short for his needs. So he fashioned one a little longer. Strapped it to his right thigh because it's under his clothes. He's wearing a garment shaped like a bathrobe, so he's got to reach through the front and do a cross grab. The actual event hints at more backstory. Seems like these two know each other. Our Jabba guy is comfortable alone with Ehud. He's been dominating Israel for the last 18 years. There's every likelihood that Ehud has done jobs for him in the past. It's very cinematic. We even get our one-liner. I've got a message for you. It's from God. The rest is a rare moment of levity in Hebrew scriptures. We're told that this Eglon guy is such a land whale that Ehud actually loses his sword stabbing him. A kind of your mama so fat joke. And it doesn't stop there. The passage adds the detail that the reason his attendants take so long to check on him is that they think he's ripping one in the ancient toilet. And who knows how long that could take.
It's funny because he's fat.
Now look. I joke because the passage does. And Hebrew scriptures almost never do that, so you have to revel in it at least a little bit. But there is a serious point here. We don't normally think of left-handedness as a superpower, of course. There's no bat signal for, I need a lefty, now. And yet, many of the most important contributions people have ever made to the human condition have come as a direct result of physical characteristics, abilities, aptitudes, that we wouldn't normally associate with heroism. The most obvious is scientific achievement, which is so often associated with physical impairment. Isaac Newton was frail and sickly. Einstein had a chronic stomach problem. Nearly every great scientist was not what you would consider a physical threat. And that makes sense. These people weren't just smart. They were also confined by their physical limitations. Hawking here had all the time in the world to think about the universe. What else was he going to do? The small guy, who's suddenly the man of the hour when you need someone who can get into tight spaces. The blind person who notices the strange smell. You could do this all day. The point being that God doesn't make mistakes. Everyone has the gifts that they were meant to have. We get this in the New Testament with Paul's metaphor of the body of Christ. The idea being that community of 100, the one that drives off 10,000, has different people with different abilities. When they combine their gifts, you get something special. And so we arrive at our central question. Who are you? What are you good at that most other people can't do? What do you have to contribute? In the last video, I talked about the first Doomsday Prepper episode and the guy who built a compound in the Rockies. The guy presented after him had a different strategy. It was a bad one. He built a mega truck to ride the streets of the wasteland, even joked about driving to Costa Rica. At least I hope it was a joke. But the reality is that guy might have a better shot at survival than the compound guy. The compound guy has a nice setup, but the truck guy has a skill. He's a mechanic. He can fix and repair vehicles. He has a skill that he can offer to the compound guy or anyone else for that matter. You may not think of mechanical ability as a survival skill, but it is, and it's a good one. It doesn't take much. Let me give you another more recent example of one being the equal of 100, and just because of a special skill. We also touched on the colonizing of Texas in the last video. At the beginning, when the first colonists were encountering Comanche raids and realizing they were dealing with something orders of magnitude different than what they were used to from Native Americans, they came up with a response. The ranger companies. The story is incredible. To match the great horse fighters they were encountering, the Rangers first found the earliest incarnations of the repeating pistols moldering in naval warehouses. Then they went to Samuel Colt and they got him to build one to their exact specifications. Then they taught themselves to shoot on the move. And that was their superpower, the ability to shoot accurately from a running horse. The term one riot, one ranger encapsulates this 1 to 100 mentality. One ranger the equal of a mob of 100. And it was built on the ranger mystique, yes, but nevertheless, if they wanted to, they also had that special ability. Any one of those rangers faced with a mob could always just get on their horse and start moving. You can't hit them, but they can sure hit you. What's your left-handedness? What's your ability to move and shoot? What are you good at? What can you do? You can always learn new skills, but in a true survival situation, you really want to know what you excel at, what you can lean on. Next time we'll build off of this by looking at a guy whose hard upbringing, his backstory, his hard life actually became his superpower. This is David Reichert from The Bunker. Click like and subscribe and click the notification bell and we'll try and keep the videos coming. Also, see the link below to order book 1 of the Holocaust Engine series, our pandemic post-apocalyptic horror that won the Pinnacle Award for the best science fiction novel of 2020.